And here, Bill, are some of your candles, just a few, returned to greet you on this, your 20th anniversary.
This meeting fittingly opened with a great and wonderful silence. And what we felt and thought in that silence is surely quite beyond any expression at all. I'm sure as seldom before, we all felt the presence of God. I am sure that every heart here looked up to him in thanksgiving for his gifts to us, the children of the night. We thank him for freedom from bondage. We thank him for our deliverance into a fellowship where we have learned that it is better to comfort than to be comforted. It is better to love than to be loved. We thank him for the opportunity to serve man and God, such as has seldom been accorded anyone. Then, too, there has been a very personal note sounded here. And Lois and I know that you're coming from so many distant places. It is a mighty token of your affection for us. She and I give our thanks to you and to God for all of that. It is her anniversary, quite as much as mine, because I had reached the place where I would die, and she had reached the place where all her bright hopes and aspirations were at an end. And then through this strange paradox, strength rising from weakness, a door was opened upon a new way of life, quite beyond our wildest dreams in even the balmiest of our days. Such are my poor words to express what I have felt here. These gifts are as three stories which commenced to run even prior to the year 34. The gifts and the stories which tell about them are these. One is the story of how we learn to break our bondage. The next is the story of how we learn to live in harmony and unity with each other and with the world about us. And the third legacy of AA has to do with how we learn to serve God and man. I wish it were possible for me to give you a rundown on all these stories, but when I proposed this to the dinner committee, they said, "Bill, tell us that night before Christmas yarn." You know, just how did this thing really get started? But before I embark on that, I draw attention to the fact that practically every alcoholic in this room has had someone, some friend, who stuck with him, who stayed with him, who went into the cave where he was and never left. So I would introduce to you my partner in the cave, and my partner since, without whom this society would in all probability never have been. And Lois would like to say to you her thanks on her anniversary.
Thank you so much. This is really, I think, one of the most moving moments of my life. And I can't say anything, I can't half express what it means to me and what being here and seeing so many of you and feeling all your love. I hope you feel mine going out to you. But I do want to thank you, every last one of you, for all you have done through these 20 years. Because this 20 years is not only accomplishment of the first early AAs, but of every single one of you. Because if you all hadn't wanted to carry this wonderful thing on, each one forging a link in this marvelous chain that is AA, we none of us, I'm sure, would be here tonight. And thank you again so very much.
Over the AA grapevine, just before dinner, there came a flash, and the flash came out of Knickerbocker Hospital. And the flash said, the 10,000th drunk number 10,000, has just passed through this place, and his name is Murphy. Therefore, I can say without fear of contradiction that Mr. Murphy is the augury of greater things to come in the destiny of this society. And after hearing that word and sitting here and looking into your faces and realizing that all of us gathered here, plus all those who have recovered of the 10,000 that went through Knickerbocker, no doubt 6 or 7, that was 6 or 7,000, I would say, that doubtless is perhaps 4 or 5% of all that has happened in the way of recovery. There are lots of our friends here tonight, and there are lots of AAs here tonight. who really don't know much about the actual start of AA. It can't be said often enough that no human being invented Alcoholics Anonymous. God, in His providence, channeled ideas and inspiration through many, many individuals to bring this society to the point of where it stands today. Friends, non-alcoholics, have been used tremendously and repeatedly in the formation of our recovery program, of contributions which are born on our wholeness and unity, and they have, in legions, helped us to serve and carry this message worldwide. Tonight, I would just like to talk about the recovery. And I would like to talk about 4 people who, in my estimate, were indispensable channels through which the main ideas coursed into us alcoholics. Again, we alcoholics invented nothing. The story properly begins at Zurich, Switzerland, probably in the year 1930. And a certain American businessman had gone there that we shall call Roland. A man of affairs, a man of prominence, a man of parts. Well, he's probably what nowadays we call Park Avenue stumblebum, you know? He had run the usual course we know so well of trying out places, sanatoriums. So he said, I will seek out the best man on earth. I'll go to Carl Jung. He went there, he stayed a year, he meant business, and at the end of the year, he thought he so well understood himself that he had been really released from his obsession to drink. To his consternation, he was drunk in a matter of weeks, and trembling crawled back to Dr. Jung. And that very great and humble man said to him, Roland, when you first came, I thought you might be one of those rare ones. But I must be frank to tell you that I have never seen one single alcoholic of your kind and gravity recover under my care. I can do nothing for you. I think that is a humility which a good many an alcoholic could borrow when talking about psychiatrists. Well, our friend from America was shattered. The God of science had spoken the word of doom. So he went back to the doctor like this. He said, but doctor, is there nothing? Well, said Dr. Carl Jung, sometimes alcoholics have religious experiences, conversions, if you like, which liberate them. It happens here and there. It happens now and then. We can't quite say why and how. But said Roe, I'm a man of faith. Used to be a vestryman in the Episcopal Church. Doctor shook his head. Said, that's fine, but not fine enough. I am talking about the kind of transforming experience that remotivates and transforms people. Where can I find an experience like that, said Rowe. Well, the doctor said you'll have to seek it in any religious channel of your own choice. If you seek, perhaps you will find. No one can say. So Rowan started his quest, and he met up with the Oxford groups of that time, and they were a band of people who were talking a very simple and direct way of life. They were talking about absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, absolute love. They were talking about the guidance of God. They weren't talking much theology. They were just talking common denominators of our world. And in this atmosphere, putting all he had into the situation, Rowan experienced this mysterious and unaccountable departure of his obsession to drink. He returned to America, went to his farm at Glastonbury, Vermont, where he was joined by two other alcoholics, one by the name of Shep, another by the name of Siebel. And one of these fellows knew the chap that we in AA affectionately call Ebby, my schoolmate up there in Vermont. Ebby was up in the old hometown, they heard, and he was raising particular hell. The family had gone back to Albany. They just summered there at Manchester. Ebby had got a hold of Pop's new car. He had run it off the road into the side of a farmhouse. The car made a clean, neat entry into the kitchen, pushing the stove aside, but none of the occupants. Whereupon Ebby had stepped out and said, "Folks, how about a cup of coffee?" Well, the neighbors up there who loved the boy figured that they had about enough, so they would send him down to Bennington and before Judge Graves, Seaber's father, and get him committed to Brattleboro. The trio of Glastonbury heard about this. They went and fetched Ebby. And here was the transmission line again at work. I saw Ebby only recently in Texas. And he recalled the terrific impression that Roland had made on him. The God of science in Zurich had said, "You cannot do anything about this alone. You have to have some kind of transforming experience." And Eddie again recounted to me only months ago how deeply that hit him when another alcoholic gave him the news. Meanwhile, I had been approaching Ebby's state. The end of the long road for Lois and me came up here in Towns Hospital in the summer of 1934. Like Roland's case, the doctor there, one we all now know as Silky, thought that I might be one of those rare ones that could recover. But here he was in his office on a hot night talking to Lois while I lay upstairs. Here came the same sense again. Lois is saying to him, "But doctor, he's a man of tremendous willpower. He wants to stop. Why can't he stop?" Then the dear old man was obliged to pass sentence. He was kind, but there wasn't any doubt. Said he, "Bill's habit of drink has now turned into an obsession which his will can't break. There is nothing that I can do to educate him out of this, There is nothing that any physical treatment can do that I know anything about. I am at the end of my resources. So Lois, like Roland said, well, doctor, well, what next? And Silky said, I'm afraid you'll have to lock him up. Else he'll go mad and die some of these days. Well, I left town. By this time I knew what the score was. For a while fear kept me sober. Terrific vigilance, fighting this thing all the time. Some months went by, something very unusual for me. Oh, I was a 2-bottle man a day, 3 to get drunk. So 2 or 3 months of sobriety. Then I began to get self-confidence. I began to say to myself, well, this isn't too bad. I'm beginning to feel better. I go over to Wall Street, I make a few dollars. Maybe this isn't so bad. Then 20 years ago, come day after tomorrow, Armistice Day, 1934, I said to Lois as she set out to work in the department store, where all our support now came from, I said, Lois, I'd like to go over to Staten Island and play around the golf. I could see the fear in her eyes, but she said, oh, do it. You haven't done that in a long time. Soon I'm going down the aisle. Beside me is a man with a fine target rifle. We get talking about shooting. All of a sudden, the bus collides with a bus ahead of us. Nobody is hurt, but we're left standing on the pavement waiting for the next bus. Said the man to me, let's go in there. I think maybe we can get a drink. I said, let's do. So we went inside. And I ordered ginger ale. What? He said, don't you drink? No, I said, I am an alcoholic. I'm a guy who has an obsession that I've just got to break. This obsession drives me to drink. According to the doctors, I've got a physical sensitivity that condemns me to go mad or die if I keep it up. That's how bad I am. That's why I'm drinking ginger ale. Okay, the fellow said, please go right on. If you don't mind, though, I'll have a scotch and soda. Another one. We get on the bus, and this so well demonstrates this insidious insanity. We come to the parting of the ways. I'm going to the golf course, he's going to the rifle range. We're in front of another little hotel. The bus is stopped. It's noontime. Says he, let's go in. We'll get a sandwich. We sat at the bar. He had another drink, a sandwich. I get a sandwich, a glass of ginger ale. We sit there still talking about shooting. And I remembered then how I began to sort of wool gather. The place in back of us was filling up with celebrants of Armistice Day. And the people, they were filling up too, and that buzz arose that we know so well in the bar room. And somehow that was reminiscent of that marvelous Armistice Day in France. Ah, what a wonderful release that was. The champagne we had in Bordeaux. And these thoughts ran as an undercurrent in my mind. Along comes the bartender, bright as a button. A glass in each hand, he plumps one down in front of my friend, he plumps another down in front of me, and he says, boys, it's Armistice Day. Have one on the house. I said, thanks very much, and go for it. My friend looked at me and said, are you completely crazy? Do you realize what you told me up the street only an hour ago? Oh, yes. I said, I guess I am crazy. And I was. The Lord found me lying in the areaway of 182 Clinton Street where we lived the next morning, still dragging the golf bag, terrific gash in my scalp where I'd fallen against the steel grate. Well, then I was back on. What was the use? A week later, the telephone rings. My friend Abby, who is on this line of succession from Dr. Young to Roland, is now on the other end of the wire. Oh, I thought to myself, this is wonderful. We'll talk about the good old days. Why would we talk about the good old days? Because the present was practically unbearable and there wasn't to be any future. Yes, we drink up my gin and we talk about the good old days. Soon Abby is in the door. Through my haze, I could somehow sense that he was different. Something had happened. He came in. I pushed the gin over the table. No, not drinking. Not drinking now. What, Abby, you on the water wagon? No, not exactly. I'm just not drinking now. What's got into you, Abby? Well, he said, I got religion. Well, that was a terrific jolt to me. Then I knew for sure he was crazy. You see, I'd had one of these dandy modern educations that had taught me that man is God. Well, you had to be polite. I said, what brand? Oh, well, he said, I don't know, you should call it a religion, and ran across a crowd of people. And then he recounted this experience I've just told you. And then he began to tell of his contact with this crowd of people, most of them non-alcoholics, but here and there were some alcoholics, particularly this man Hazard, Rowe. And he began to tell me that though he didn't agree with all of their tenets and some of their methods, of course, alcoholics are great people to disagree, but he had abstracted from what they taught certain basics that had released him, he said, from his desire to drink. And what were these basics? Well, there was the idea of a personal inventory of one's defects. There was the idea of confessing these in confidence to another person. There was the idea of making restitution for harms done. There was the idea of carrying that message to other people. There was the idea of dependence upon and guidance upon God as you understood it. Those were the essential ideas that he transmitted to me over the kitchen table. Well, I said, Abby, this sounds perfectly sensible, all except the God business. After all, these aren't any very new ideas either. You might have got these most any place. Well, he said, but the point is, I got them, and this is where I got them. Over that bunch of Oxford Group people. And I think that Roland made me ready to receive those ideas. If I hadn't been first approached by alcoholics, I don't believe those people could have sold me this bill of goods. But he said, I have bought enough of it so that I feel released. It seems to me that I'm not any longer fighting booze. The obsession has been lifted out of me. Release, he talked about. And then he went away. Didn't press me, didn't evangelize me, didn't try to save my soul. I went on drinking for a while. And in no waking hour could I get the spectacle of that fellow sitting across that kitchen table out of my mind. So here we were, one alcoholic talking to another. Young had said it's hopeless. Hazard had got transformed. He passed it along to Abby. Abby had been exposed to these people who were practicing what they preached. And he, another alcoholic, was talking to me across the kitchen table. And then in my background was another god of science who said, no, science can't do it for you. So, I was being made ready through all these agencies and people for what was about to happen. Eddie came another time with his friend Shep. I remember going down to Old Calvary Mission, getting there terribly drunk. They were about to throw me out. I said I was looking for something. Ebby said, how about a plate of beans? They get me sober enough. They take me in. I sit with the other penitents. I take the walk up the aisle. And as I knelt there among those sweaty people, I remember getting a little feeling of something new and different. And then it was gone again, and I went back to drinking, and I went back to fighting this God idea. But all was the face of this drunk across that kitchen table. And I knew that he wasn't on the water wagon. Something had removed his obsession to drink. So I said, well, if there's any great doctor, I'd better seek him out. But first of all, I better get sober. I go back to Town's hospital. A month ahead of the DTs this time. Not in too bad shape. Determined to get sober and have another look at this neat little formula. I arrived there, bottle in hand. I remember Silky standing in the hall, shaking his head. I yelled at him, waving a bottle, saying, this time I got something, Doc. He said, I'm afraid you have, boy, upstairs to bed. The poor old man really loved me as he loved all of those 10,000 drunks that have gone through Knickerbocker and the other 30,000 he talked with besides. So I go to bed. 3 days later, my friend shows up in the door. I said, maybe he's going to evangelize me. Maybe he's going to put heat on me. Maybe he's going to try to save my soul. Didn't do any such thing. He was full of that great Christian virtue called prudence. He knew my prejudices. He waited and made me ask, Abby, what's that neat little formula? Oh, yeah, you get honest with yourself? You get honest with another person about yourself? Internal house cleaning? Clean away the debris of the past? Help others with no demand for reward in prestige or money? Pray to God as you understand Him for guidance to direct your life and expel His obsession. As simple as that. Nothing more, nothing less. And soon he was gone again. And still I rebelled. And suddenly, I suppose, and momentarily certainly, this terrific ego of mine just collapsed. And I dropped into a terrific depression. And in the agony of that depression, I cried out. I said, no, I am prepared to do anything at all to get whatever it is. Like a cancer patient, if there's any great physician. If there is any God, let Him show Himself. And then the place went electric in a great white light. I was seized with an ecstasy, which is in nobody's power to describe. In the mind's eye, it seemed as though I was on a mountain. A great wind is blowing. I think this is not air. This is of spirit. I'm free. Then the ecstasy subsides, and I find that I'm in another world. A world in which everything is all right, no matter how wrong it seems to be. The assurance was complete. There was a sensation that I was surrounded by and suffused with a presence. And I thought to myself, so this is the God of the preachers. Such was the gift that I received that day. And such were the sources through which it had come to me. Well, pretty soon another source comes walking into that hospital in the shape of a book. It was called Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. I think it was then in circulation among the Oxford groups. And I remember how avidly I went through those pages. Kind of a learned document, a little over my head. But out of it stood these common denominators. The people who get these transforming experiences the more readily are those who utterly surrender and give up. Then the transformation sets in. Oh, sometimes in a blaze such as mine did. That doesn't make any difference. May take weeks, may take months, but it is a transforming experience that apparently arises out of some terrific collapse at depth. That much stood out of those pages. And then I realized how I had been conditioned for this. The God of science, Dr. Jung, Dr. Silkworth, said no. You can't do it on your own resource, you can't do it on the resources of science. Of yourself, you are literally nothing. It isn't a question of God's help, and you'll do it. You can't do anything. And when we got to that point of complete defeat, when those cases in the book did, then the transformation would set in. And would so change and remotivate the people affected that it couldn't be accounted for by any association or program of discipline or what have you. It began to be clear what was happening. So I get down to the Oxford group. And we have here tonight another friend. Her was a channel for the inspiration that Roland got, and Ebby got, and I got. It was from him and his living example and the principles that he taught that we have drawn the essential elements of our recovery program in AA. In other words, the scientists deflated Ebby and me and Roland and made us ready. Here was the fellow who channeled in the truth which we were then able to buy. And that fellow is a great soul. And this society will forever be in his debt. He was mightily used as a channel for us, as he has been mightily used in this country and all over the world. So it's about time, folks, that you knew Sam Shoemaker better. And I'm going to ask him to get up here and reminisce a couple of minutes about his first impressions of us drunks as we were trying to get well down around his church.
I feel, good friends, that there is something inappropriate and a little bit obtrusive about anybody saying anything after Bill tonight. And I wouldn't do it but at his behest. When I knew this occasion was coming to pass, I wanted to come from Pittsburgh. I wouldn't have been anywhere else in the world tonight if I could get here. I love Bill and I love Lois. Lois didn't look like she does tonight in those days. She looked 20 years older, not 20 years younger. Although she has added that silver touch on the top, which is so becoming, and about which I'm a little more aware than I was in those days. I've acquired it myself. It was an immense privilege to watch this thing take place. And one of the joys and privileges of my life has been the very minor share that we had down at Calvary Church in its beginnings. We weren't sure whether Bill was going off on a kind of aberration, leaving the rest of us in the old group, and he going off on a kind of a toot just to work with his own alcoholic friends. Thank God Bill stayed with it and left us alone with our misgivings about it. When I think of the days of and weeks and I guess years almost of pretty nearly solitary pioneering that he and a very few others had to do. I am profoundly grateful that he just kept on with the thing that he felt he was being led and called to do. I remember that incident about Ebby and breaking in through the lady's house and asking for a cup of coffee. As I recall it, she wanted to have him arrested for impertinence, not for tearing her house down. We little knew in those days what was in the wind and what God would make out of these beginnings. Tenuous, difficult, in a way groping, because this was real pioneering. Nobody else had dealt with this thing. Nobody else had seriously tried to apply faith in this whole situation. I still will always say to Bill and to the AA family that our main contribution was making some mistakes that if we hadn't made them first, somebody was going to have to make afterwards. I always had a kind of a liking for sinners. I always kind of liked people that were in mischief better than I liked stuffy church people. I still do. They're more fun to fool with. And I got a pious notion when we had not long built Calvary House down at 61 Gramercy Park that it would be an excellent addition if we took on about half a dozen gentlemen drunks. I had an old boy of a friend of mine up here who was a good candidate, and there were many others. And I thought they'd help each other, and they did help each other, but they helped each other down and not up. And one Sunday morning I went to my church, and through the central stained glass window over the altar, I found an alarm clock that had been hurled through the window the night before from the parish house that stood just behind it. I became aware that we weren't doing such an awful good job with my gentlemen drunk friends. And I still think that our mistakes were one of the best contributions that we made to AA. But I'm grateful for those years because with old Harry Hadley down at Calvary Mission and with our own blunders at 61 Gramercy Park, I think Bill and some others learned how not to do it. Concerning Roland, it was an astonishing thing to see. I knew Roland well, and the change in that man's life was a fabulous spectacle. If you go down inside the front door of Old Calvary Church at the corner of 4th Avenue and 21st Street and turn to the right, you will find a very small stained glass window inside that vestibule in memory of Roland Hazard. When that fellow died, he was again a vestryman of that particular Episcopal church. God had kept that fellow right through until his end in an amazing kind of victory, and I'm grateful for the part that he had in this amazing development. Bill says that the element of honesty has been terribly important in this development. Concerning those absolutes, I believe absolutes are a good thing to go for. I think they're a very bad thing to think you've ever reached. I heard about a Carthusian monk a while ago who was speaking about some other monastic orders, and he said, of course, the Franciscans are rather ahead of us in piety, and the Dominicans are way ahead of us in intellectual development, but for humility we're tops. Now look out for thinking that you're absolutely honest, or absolutely pure, or absolutely loving, or absolutely unselfish. It's a great thing to go for, as long as you don't think you have gotten there. I know an old colored preacher once who said, if you think you is where you've gone, you're never going to get there. I work in Pittsburgh with a wonderful bishop named Austin Pardue, and he says that this matter of honesty, facing yourself, is the beginning of all Christian conversion. Yourself in the light of Christ. I believe he's right. He also says that he thinks we had better pray to God to be merciful enough not to show us all of ourselves at one time. We would probably die from shock. We get these things step by step as we're able to face them. But they are part of what makes this or any other movement that has the Spirit of God in it effective. I'm wondering when the churches and the rest of the world are going to learn from this thing that these 12 steps are not just good for alcoholics. They're good for all sinners, starting with us. I haven't reminisced very much. Bill's better at this reminiscence than I am. I've been writing down every word he said that I could remember, because I wanted to remember the exact story of precisely how it happened, and his memory is a lot better than mine on that. But I do want to say to him what he's meant to those hundreds and thousands, tens of thousands of people, I suppose, outside the ranks of actual alcoholics, who have learned from AA a little bit better how to live and how to go after some of these absolutes, and also to remember that we have not reached them. This is a great night. I hope it's a great step forward in this tremendous movement. I'll say one thing and I'll sit down. It was right here in this room, as I recall it, where we came for an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting a few years ago, and Austin McCormick, the Commissioner of Correction in New York, was here and was a speaker at that time. And I remember his words. He said, "This may yet prove to be one of the great movements of all time." I think the succeeding years have borne him out, and I believe the years that are ahead of us are going to bear him out still more. Bill, it's all right to listen to the kind of things these people have been saying to you if you don't inhale. But let me just say one thing. You never can love any guy too much. You never can tell him too often that you love him. You can't trust him too much. You can't give any too great thanks to God for him if he's putting his life out in interest for God to use, as Bill and Lois, God bless them, have done.
I hope that the proof now goes on apace that nobody invented Alcoholics Anonymous, that we are the beneficiaries of a benign conspiracy of God to set us free, working through many willing minds and hearts and hands. Now, when I arrived down there in the Oxford groups, I think I caused Sam and his dear friends almost as much trouble as the guys with the alarm clock, because I have this very fixed idea. Maybe it was partly inspiration, but I fancy there was a good deal of conceit in it. I was soon heard to say, "I am going to sober up all the drunks in the world." And we set out apace to do it. The house over Clinton Street was filled with drunks. We visited them at Calvary, Mission, up at Towns Hospital, anywhere we could lay hands on them, and nothing whatever happened for 6 months. At that time, people began to murmur, "Why doesn't this guy go to work?" In fact, I think some of my friends got guidance from God that I should go back to work. It was eminently practical guidance. So I began to sit around Wall Street brokerage houses like Macabre, waiting for something to turn up, and it did. And suddenly I'm in the midst of a little proxy row that took me out to Akron, Ohio, and there's the great milling around, and through some quickly found friends, I hope to get control, listen to the word, of a small company, and then, of course, that would supply me the living. In my spare time, maybe we'd fix some drunks. We get to Akron, the deal blows up in my face, my friends depart in disgust. I'm in the Mayflower Hotel with $10 in my pocket, not enough for a fare home. For the first time since that experience in Towns Hospital, I began to be afraid. I found myself walking up and down in the Mayflower lobby. It was Saturday afternoon. The barroom was filling up. Then I eased down to the other end of the corridor, and there stood a church director. And absently I kept looking at him. Then suddenly I was seized with a real panic. I said to myself, look, my friend, you're in a fair way to get drunk. Then I'd walk up and down again. Well, why not go in the bar room and order a bottle of ginger ale? You might scrape an acquaintance. Pretty lonely there. And then it occurred to me. In fact, it was borne in upon me for the first time that even though the effort I had made with other alcoholics had apparently brought nothing to them, it had brought a great deal to me. So then I say, not teacher, not preacher, not evangelist. No, I need another alcoholic so that I can forget my troubles by talking to him. I need him as much as he needs me. And I stopped again before the church directory, ran my finger down a list of churches and preachers. It stopped at the name of Walter Thomas. Turned out to be the Episcopal preacher in town. I called up and I said, I'm an alcoholic from New York. I'm in a bad way. I'm not drunk, but I may get that way. I got to have another drunk to work on. Well, this was something of a shock to the good man. Drunks run by one were bad enough, but not by twos and threes. However, he caught on. He was very nice. He gave me a list of some Oxford group people. Well, the Oxford group at that stage in Akron had kind of broken up into some factions. Nevertheless, one chap was very helpful. I finally got a list of maybe 10 people. I began to call them up. Well, as I say, it was a Saturday afternoon. People were going away. They couldn't be found. See you in church Sunday. Until I finally exhausted the whole list. At the end of the list stood the name of Cyberman. And I said, must be the wife of that rubber magnate. What would she want with a drunk from New York on a Saturday afternoon looking for a drunk to work on? I even went downstairs and looked in the bar again, and something said to me, you'd better go up there and make that call. So I did. A lovely southern voice came over the wire. I quickly told her my story. She said, I'm no alcoholic, but I think I understand. Will you come right straight out here? Another friend who had time and who cared enough. I told her the story. She told me about Dr. Bob, how he'd fallen apart in that town as a surgeon, how he'd tried the groups, how he'd read religious literature, how he'd tried church attendance, how he'd been treated medically. She knew he wanted to stop. Why couldn't he stop? She called the Smith's house. Ann answered. And Ann said, well, this sounds interesting, Henrietta, but I don't think we can come over today. You see, it's Mother's Day, and Bob is a sentimental man, and he has just come home with a great big potted plant for me, and he has set the plant upon the table, but he is so potted he is on the floor. I don't think we can get over today. Well, said Henrietta brightly, won't you come over tomorrow? So next afternoon, at 5 o'clock, Dr. Bob and Ann walked in the door of Henrietta's house. She discreetly ushered Dr. Bob and me into her library. Dr. Bob said, I can't stay but a few minutes. I said, I know just how you feel. You're shaky. You probably want a drink. The upshot was that we talked for 4 or 5 hours. And as his story in the book Alcoholics Anonymous will show, and as his recording made at Detroit not long before he died further demonstrates, the impression I made upon him was not directly of any spiritual character at all. He says over and over, this is the first man that I ever met up with who knew what he was talking about concerning alcoholism out of his own experience and out of the mouths of science. In other words, I took Silky's advice, and I poured the death sentence into him as hard as I could, so far as his being able to get over it by himself. The spark that was to be Alcoholics Anonymous was probably struck then and there. I went to live with Dr. Bob and thought it would be a little safer. My business continued somehow in Akron for a while. I stayed there during that summer. And pretty soon Dr. Bob was saying to me, Bill, we better get to work. We better find some drugs. So he called the city hospital, got a hold of the head nurse down there. Said there was a man from New York with a cure for alcoholism. The nurse said, Doctor, have you tried it yourself? He persisted. She said, we've got just a man for it. Just came in here, used to be a city councilman, well-known lawyer about town. Couldn't get home from here the last 6 times. Been in there 6 times in 4 months. Couldn't even get home sober. We've got him strapped down. He blacked the eyes of one nurse before we did it. How would that one suit you? The doc said, well, put him to bed. Here's the medication. We'll be down as soon as he cleared up. And presently, Dr. Bob and I looked at the first man on the collectively, and that was Bill Dodson, who passed out of our sighting hearing only a few weeks ago, who never relapsed since. He kept the faith. Then in Akron, the city on the hill, 3 candles were lit, and it stayed lit. How many people then contributed? Vital contribution. Dr. Young, good old Silky, William James, Sam Shoemaker. Who then invented Alcoholics Anonymous? Well, it was God Almighty. Such is the story of how we alcoholics learn to be free of our obsession. May God grant that this AA Trinity of recovery, of unity, and of service be a story which shall continue so long into the future as God may need us.
In traditional conclusion, I will ask Dr. Shoemaker to lead us in the Lord's Prayer.
Let's close in the usual way. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Pleasure at this time to introduce to you Bill's friend of many years standing, a great friend of AA, fine physician, scientist, and research man, Dr. Harry Tiebout of New York City. Under ordinary circumstances, I should thank the man who introduced me for his very nice remarks, but also for years I have been teaching the need for ego reduction. I'm not sure that my ego got sufficiently reduced by the introduction. When the invitation came to speak before this group, I immediately said, yes, I want to go. For many years, as you all know, I had been associated with AA, And all the experiences that I had had came flashing through my mind, and I had so much to say that I didn't quite know where to begin. And with your permission, I am going to use the manuscript so that the points that I want to make will not be forgotten. At an AA meeting, the speaker, as a rule, identifies himself as an alcoholic and then proceeds to tell his story, sprinkling garlands of wisdom and humor or both as he goes along. I shall also tell my story, although I am much less sure about matching either the wit or the wisdom of the AA speakers. I joined AA by proxy in 1939 when a patient of mine became a member of the New York group. Well do I remember my first meeting. It was tinged with excitement. AA was going on the air for the first time. One of the members, trying to rehabilitate himself, had talked with Gabriel Hita, who, on hearing his story, suggested that he, the AA man, appear on the program We the People. This was the night, far too thrilling and special for settling down to a regular meeting. The actual event was a bit of a letdown. The man from AA spoke briefly of his experiences. Gabriel Hita, plainly puzzled, asked a couple of pointless questions, and it was over. AA, however, had taken a step toward making itself known. Not a very big step, to be sure, but one of the many which finally led to its present position on the national and international scene. Later, I attended other meetings, more orthodox in character, and as I did, I developed the conviction that the group had hit upon a method which solved the problem of excessive drinking. In a sense, it was an answer to my prayers. After years of butting my head against the problem of treating the alcoholic, one could begin to hope. In retrospect, my first 2 or 3 years of contact with AA were the most exciting in my whole professional life. AA was then in its miracle phase. Everything that happened seemed strange, wonderful. Hopeless drunks were being lifted out of the gutter. Individuals who had sought every known means of help without success were responding to this new approach. To be close to any such group, even by proxy, was electrifying. In addition, professionally, a whole new avenue of problem of alcohol had opened up. Somewhere in the AA experience was the key to sobriety. Here was the first authentic clue after many years of fruitless effort. Needless to say, the possibilities ahead were most intriguing. Perhaps I could learn how AA worked, and thus could learn something about how people stopped drinking. All of which meant that I shared in the general excitement of those days. I could see some daylight ahead. My future in this regard was now clear. I would try to discover what made AA tick. In this quest for understanding, I would have never gotten beyond first base if it had not been for Bill and many of the early members. A study of the 12 steps helped a little, but of far greater importance were the many insights already possessed by Bill and the others into the process through which AA brought about its results. I heard of the need to hit bottom, of the necessity for accepting a higher power, of the indispensability of humility, ideas which had never crossed my professional horizon and certainly had never influenced my non-professional thinking or attitudes. Revolutionary as they were, they nevertheless made sense, and I found myself embarked on a tour of discovery. I began to recognize more clearly what hitting bottom really implied, and I began to do what I could to induce the experience in others, always wondering what was happening inside the individual as he went through the crisis of hitting bottom. Finally, fortune smiled upon me again, this time from another patient. For some period, she had been under my new brand of psychotherapy designed to promote hitting bottom. For reasons completely unknown, she experienced a mild but typical conversion which brought her into a positive state of mind. Led by the newly found spiritual elements, weak though they were, she started attending various churches in town. One Monday morning, she entered my office, her eyes ablaze, and at once commenced talking. I know what happened to me. I heard it in church yesterday. I surrendered. With that word surrender, she handed me my first real awareness of what happened during the period of hitting bottom. The individual was fighting an admission of being licked, of admitting that he was powerless. If and when he surrendered, he quit fighting, could admit he was licked, and could accept that he was powerless and needed help. If he did not surrender, 1,000 crises could hit him and nothing would happen. The need to induce surrender became the new therapeutic goal. The miracle of AA was now a little clearer. For reasons still obscure, the program and the fellowship of AA could induce a surrender, which could in turn lead to a period of no drinking. As might be expected, I too had a thrill of my own. I was getting in on what was happening, always an enjoyable experience. Still questing eagerly, I shifted my therapeutic attack. The job now was to induce surrender. When I tried to cause that, I ran into a whole nest of resistances to that idea. Totally new territory to be explored. As I continued my tour, it became ever more apparent that in everyone's psyche there existed an unconquerable ego which bitterly opposed any thought of defeat. Until that ego was somehow reduced or rendered ineffective, no likelihood of surrender could be anticipated. The shift in emphasis from hitting bottom to surrender to ego reduction all occurred during the first 5 or 6 years after my initial contact with AA. I well remember the first AA meeting to which I spoke on the subject of ego reduction. AA, still very much in its infancy, was celebrating a 3rd or 4th anniversary of one of the groups. The speaker, immediately preceding me, told in detail of the efforts of his local group, which consisted of 2 men, to get him to dry up and become its 3rd member. After several months of vain effort on their part and repeated nosedives on his, the speaker went on to say, finally I got cut down to size and have been sober ever since. A matter of some 2 or 3 years then. When my turn came to speak, I used his phrase, cut down to size, as a text around which to weave my remarks. Before long, out of the corner of my eye, I was conscious of a disconcerting stare. It was coming from the previous speaker. Looking a little more directly, I could see his eyes fixed on me in open-eyed wonder. It was perfectly clear that he was utterly amazed that he had said anything which made sense to a psychiatrist. The look of incredulity never left his face for my entire talk. The incident had one value in my eyes. It showed that 2 people, one approaching the matter clinically and the other relying on his own intuitive report of what had happened to him, both came up with exactly the same observation, the need for ego reduction. During the past decade, my own endeavors have centered primarily upon this problem of ego reduction. How far I have been able to explore that territory is not at all certain. I have, however, made a little progress, and in the minutes remaining, I should try first to acquaint you with some of my findings, and second, to to relate them to the AA scene as I see it. As I've already stated, the fact that hitting bottom could produce a surrender which cut the ego to size was evident fairly soon. In time, two additional facts manifested themselves. The first was that a reduced ego has marvelous recuperative powers. The second was that surrender is an essentially disciplinary function and experience. The first is merely repeating a fact known to you all. It is common knowledge that a return of the full-fledged ego can happen at any time. Years of sobriety are no insurance against its resurgence. No AA, regardless of his veteran status, can ever relax his guard against the encroachments of a reviving ego. Recently, one AA, writing to another, reported he was suffering, he had feared, from halitosis, an obvious reference to the smugness and self-complacency which so easily can creep into the individual with years of sobriety behind him. The assumption that one has all the answers, or the contrary, that one needs to know no answers and just follow AA, are two indicators of trouble. In both, open-mindedness is notably absent. Perhaps the commonest manifestation of the return of ego is witnessed in the individual who falls from his pink cloud, a state of mind familiar to you all. This blissful state is a logical aftermath of surrender. The ego, which is full of striving, just quits, and the individual senses peace and quiet within. The result is an enormous feeling of release, and the person flies right up to his pink cloud and thinks he has found heaven on earth. Everyone knows he is doomed for a fall. But it is perhaps not equally clear that it is the ego slowly making its comeback which forces the descent from the pink cloud into the arena of life, where with the help of AA he can learn how to become a sober person and not an angel. I could go on with many more examples familiar to you all to show you the danger of ever assuming that the ego is dead and buried. Its capacity for rebirth is utterly astounding and must never be forgotten. My second finding, that surrender is a disciplinary experience, requires explanation. In recent articles, I have shown that the ego basically must be forging continuously ahead, and that operates on the unconscious assumption that it, the ego, should never be stopped. It takes for granted that its right to go ahead, and in this respect has no expectation of being stopped and no capacity to adjust to that eventuality. Stopping says in effect, no, you cannot continue, which is the essence of disciplinary control. The individual who cannot take a stopping is fundamentally an undisciplined person. The function of surrender in AA is now clear. It produces that stopping by causing the individual to say, I quit. I give up my headstrong ways. I've learned my lesson. Very often, for the first time in that individual's adult surrender, and truly feel, thy will, not mine, be done. When that is true, we have become, in fact, obedient servants of God. The spiritual life at that point is a reality. We have become members of the human race. I have now presented the 2 points I wish to make. Namely, first, the ego is revivable, and second, surrender is a disciplinary experience. I next wish to discuss their significance for AA as I see it. Primarily, they say quite simply, AA can never just be a miracle. The single act of surrender can produce sobriety by its stopping effect upon the ego. Unfortunately, that ego will return unless the individual learns to accept a disciplined way of life, which means the tendency for ego comeback is permanently checked. This is not new to AA members. They have learned that a single surrender is not enough. Under the wise leadership of the Founding Fathers, the need for continued endeavor to maintain that miracle has been steadily stressed. The 12 steps urge repeated inventory, not just one. And the 12th step itself, a routine reminder that one must work at preserving sobriety. Moreover, it is referred to as 12-step work, which is exactly what it is. By that time, the miracle is for the other fellow. The traditions are also part of the non-miracle aspect of AA. They represent, as Bill has said, the meanings of lessons of experience. They serve as guides for the inexperienced. In reality, they check the ways of the innocent and the unwary. They bring the individual down to earth and present him with the facts of reality. In their own fashion, they say, pay heed to the teachings of experience, or you will court disaster. It is not without reason that we talk of the sober voice of experience. My stress on the non-miracle elements of AA has a purpose. When I first made my acquaintance with AA, I rode the pink cloud with most of its members. I too went through a period of disillusionment, and fortunately for me, I came out with a faith far stronger than anything a pink cloud can supply. Mind you, I'm not selling miracles short. They do loosen the individual up. I know, however, now, the truth of the biblical saying, by their works you shall know them. Only through hard toil and labor can lasting results be obtained. As a consequence of the need for work to supplement any miracle, my interest in the non-miracle features has grown. I can accept more truly the necessity of organization, of structure, which curbs as well as guides. I believe there must be meetings like this one to provide a sense of belonging to a big working organization of which each individual is but a part. And I believe that any group of individuals who fails to participate in the enterprise of the organization is rendering himself and his group a disservice by not submitting to the disciplinary values inherent in those activities. We may be keeping the ego free of entanglements, but he is also keeping himself unstopped. His chance of remaining sober are not of a high order. He is really going it alone and is headed for another miracle which may not come off the next time. In closing, let me reaffirm my proxy membership in AA. I have been in on its glowing start, and I shared in its growing pains, and now have reached a state of deep conviction in the soundness of the AA process, including its miracle aspects. I tried to convey to you some of my observations on the nature of that process. I hope they will help in making the AA experience not just a miracle, but a way of life which is filled with eternal values. AA has, I can assure you, done just that for me. Thank you.